I'll begin this afternoon's session with a brief introduction. Welcome to the Canadian Institute of Forestry's National Electronic Lecture Program. My name is Sharon Yang, and I will be hosting today's session. Today is Tuesday, April 15th, 2025, and this is the last session in the e-lecture series entitled Advances in Operational Forestry, Tree Planting, and Carbon Mitigation Research. The series is a collaborative effort coordinated between the Canadian Forest Service and the Canadian Council of Forest Ministers. The CIF-IFC is very pleased to collaborate and host these webinars. For today's session, we are pleased to have Eric Neilson, Jennifer Klutsch, and Cyriac Mvolo, who will give an exciting presentation titled Revealing the Breadth of Consequences of Wildfire Mitigation in Alberta, a multidisciplinary approach. To kick things off, Eric Neilson is a wildlife research scientist with the Canadian Forest Service. His work focuses on woodland caribou recovery, habitat distribution, and climate-related vulnerabilities. He holds a Ph.D. in ecology from the University of Alberta and a Master's of Science in Primate Conservation from Oxford Brookes University. Eric has a background in wildlife biology and spatial ecology, and has researched wildlife camera trapping methodology. He has conducted research on various vertebrate taxa from around the world, ranging from Alberta to Cambodia to Indonesia. Jennifer Klutsch is a forest entomology research scientist with the Canadian Forest Service. Her research focuses on bark beetle-host interactions and the ecological impacts of outbreaks. She had advanced understanding of tree susceptibility to bark beetles under climate change, especially in novel hosts. Currently, she investigates post-disturbance fungal and insect dynamics and develops improved detection tools for low population mountain pine beetles. Cyriac Mvolo is a research scientist with the Canadian Wood Fibre Centre and an adjunct professor at the University of Quebec in Abitibi-Témiscamingue. He leads research on woody feedstock characterization and holds a Ph.D. in environmental sciences. Cyriac is also a registered professional forester and serves in various roles in a few bioeconomy dedicated groups within and outside the Government of Canada. With that, I will now pass it over to Eric to begin the presentation.
Thanks, Sharon. Appreciate the introduction. That was great. And I think that doing that introduction where you sort of go over the various things that the three of us work on is helpful because we want to try to talk about a multidisciplinary project that we have running here at the Northern Forestry Center in Edmonton. And I'll get into that in a minute, why we sort of have identified the multidisciplinary approach as the way to tackle this project. So as the title suggests, what we're going to talk about today in large part is wildfire and how we can deal with wildfire in terms of management, mitigation, moving forward with different ways of dealing with this increasing challenge in forested lands in Canada. So wildfire, as well as insect infestations and other forest disturbances, are increasing under climate change around the world and in Canada in particular. Everyone in the audience probably has a sense of what happened in 2023, where we had this incredible record year. There was double the number of the amount of area burned set decades ago, and the previous years have all sort of seen these increased numbers of fires, of mega fires and large fire frequency and size. So this is a problem that I don't need to tell the audience is something worth considering from a management perspective. And what we'd like to tackle today are considerations around mitigation of wildfire, the ways in which we can sort of get out on the landscape and do something about it, but then talk about the cost of that and the other sort of consequences of doing that. So what we're talking about in that respect is two approaches, prescribed burns and thinning. these are essentially management actions that deal with fuel connectivity, fuel density. And so these are things that have been shown to reduce wildfire severity, but also there's a couple other sort of outcomes of these approaches, including changes to wildlife habitat, nutrient cycling, tree growth, effects on forest health, stand structure. And in this paper by Holland 2022, they point out that there are savings that come from doing these things. When you can mitigate the amount of fire that's out in the landscape, it creates savings for inventory and for having to initial attack costs and so on. But they also are not free. They have operational costs. This is a couple things that require funding to get out on the landscape to tackle. And there are inventory costs as well. So if you thin a stand, or even in cases where you use prescribed burns to remove some of the fine fuels or some of the connected fuels, there may be effects on the forest inventory. And one thing that we'll sort of be skirting around a little bit in our talk is the possibility that prescribed fires escape. So there are some risks involved as well. So what we want to tackle with this project are asking about some of the other downstream effects of these two approaches. What are the costs to biodiversity, to pest management? In situations where you've either thinned a stand or used a prescribed burn, but also in the case that you maybe have a more severe fire due to a prescribed burn. And then we want to also tackle this possibility that there are revenue possibilities from doing those operational approaches. So if you thin a stand and you have fiber generated from that, in the case where there's a large fire, maybe that you're having to deal with from a prescribed fire, and the possibility of salvage log or that kind of thing. So these two questions at the bottom are what we're really trying to get at with this project. As we sort of said in our title, and as I alluded to initially, and as Sharon pointed out when she introduced us, we have a very kind of wide range of interests and expertise with respect to forest ecology and management. And so we wanted to sort of highlight this multidisciplinary approach that we're taking. So this is the kind of approach you want to take when you have a complex problem and you need to construct a common comprehensive definition of the problem, an exploratory view of relevant mechanisms and processes, so you can generate a manageable set of problem solutions. As everyone on the call knows, I'm sure, wildfire has a lot of different moving parts. There are a ton of different ways to deal with causes, ways to deal with the outcomes, possibilities for mitigation. And as we're sort of trying to get at with this talk, other consequences that need to be better understood. So we wanted to come together to try to tackle this issue of the consequences and outcomes of prescribed burns and thinning in a multidisciplinary way. So our goal is to pool our resources and expertise to evaluate how these two approaches present bioeconomic opportunities and have unmeasured ecological costs. And we will, as we get into the talk, we're going to sort of split ourselves into talking about a few different pieces of that. And we'll try to discuss the utility of multidisciplinary approaches to understanding trade-offs, consequences of these mitigation processes. So I will.
Thank you, Erin. So in May of 2023, there was a wildfire that started near Fox Creek, Alberta, in central Alberta. And it, throughout the summer, burned about a little more than 66,000 hectares. And it was in mixed wood, so boreal forest with mainly aspen, but lots of lodgepole pine and white spruce and black spruce. And this kind of gave us an opportunity to start looking at tackling these questions, the questions about consequences of fire mitigation and also any opportunities we could get from that. So from this map, this shows the perimeter And it shows that there's a lot of roads, so it was an accessible area for us. And it was also a very mixed severity fire. This is shows some high severity fire in the foreground, but in the background you can see some intact aspen forest. So it was a mixed severity forest, and we contacted our collaborators at West Fraser Blue Ridge Lumber to talk about using their area to start tackling these questions. And so we made a collaboration and worked together on this to develop these objectives. So the objectives are 3 based on our different disciplines. So ranging from wood quality and conversion to entomology and pest management and to wildlife biology and conservation. So the first objective was to investigate woody tissues as a source of biochemicals. And we'll each individually talk about our approaches to this in a second. And then the second objective was to identify any pest issues. And the third was to estimate habitat quality and for endangered species, mammalian species. So now this will be Cyriac talking.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, as Jen said, we have 3 objectives that are related from our expertise. And one of the objectives was to look at opportunities to use the salvage wood from prescribed bone or tin stand to manufacture bioactive compounds. And to achieve that, we selected 4 fire severity classes from 3 species here in Alberta. You will see that we leave the low, the moderate, and the high severity active, but we decided after starting the work on the ground not to harvest very high fire severity, just because it was less appealing for the next processes, for the next step of the processes of giving value to the harvested material. And in this case, this project, we focus on bark. So it was essential for us to harvest, to salvage trees that still have bark attached. We also have a control, because anything we do, we have to contrast that to what will happen in case of no fire. And we also harvested trees killed by mountain pine beetle, as Jennifer will describe later in her work. We had uninvested trees with more than 50% red needles and trees with less than 50% needles. You will ask what the picture is showing. Is in this project, you can see you have kind of 2 meter logs. You have a 60 centimeter log and a 40 centimeter log. This project is, as Eric said, fire has a lot of pressure. And in this picture, we are using some logs to address the lumber pressure, to address the bioeconomic pressure, and to in order to do that, you see we as we described in the next slide, we did a sampling that allowed us to do to achieve multiple outcomes with the same field work. And that's it here. This may be difficult for you to see, but what we did was trying not to divert from what forest company are used to in Alberta. So we collected only the mercantile ball, that's up to 7.5 centimeter top. And from that mercantile ball, you can see that we have long logs that are used for lumber. We have kind of medium dimension logs that are used still for lumber, but to test mechanical properties of lumber. We have small logs that are used for weaving, and you will see a lot of disc. But in industry, for all of these things, the first step is to debark. Once logs are debarked, usually that bark is useless. So it is landfilled, or at most it is used to, it is burned to produce some energy from boilers. But everyone working in wood quality, and especially in biochemicals, knows that wood is the bark, is the richest tissue in wood in terms of secondary metabolite and in terms of other compounds that are used in pharmaceutical, in food, industries, and even in cosmetics. So in the frame of what we are presenting today, we will focus on bark, the value that bark carries, and stressing the fact that this is a resource that is not disputed by any other industry. So it is really the best option because it is almost free and it is way richer than what we can find in other tissue. And the first year was used to acquire what can be defined really as state-of-the-art equipment. We have that extraction system you are seeing sitting down in our lab. We have the evaporator sitting, we have the pelletizer sitting, and we even have also the microwave sitting. So what we'll be doing with this equipment is, in the years that started a few weeks ago, we'll first carry a literature review to assess the most appealing and mechanical secondary metabolite to extract, and we'll be using several extraction methods as the soxhlet worm, hot extraction, continuous flow, Twizzleman, and the microwave assisted. We are already equipped for all of these methods, and we have the state-of-the-art evaporator to extract whatever secondary metabolite we will manufacture based on the equipment we have, and we will target producing some polyphenols and essential oils. We are preparing the protocols, and basically this is where we are as of today. And by the end of next year, we'll have all the protocol tailored for what is harvested after a wildfire in the boreal forest, and how to turn that into valuable chemicals. With that, I'll turn it to Jennifer.
So for objective 2, looking at what sort of insects and damage might happen in a post-treatment area, either prescribed burn or thinning, or even a wildfire like we're using as a proxy, I'm looking at a number of beetles. So after a low severity fire, there's a threat that bark beetles or other beetles other pests might increase in population. So through collecting the 40 centimeter bolts, like what Cyriac just mentioned, I'm going to be rearing these insects out and identifying them over the different years that we are collecting this data for all 3 species. And I'm also recording damage that they're causing, how many holes, and what fungi come from them. And another source of damage to this wood, but also an opportunity for nutrient cycling, are the fungal stains and rots. And we found an interesting phenomena in our burned trees, and also across at least Western Canada, a coffee stain that we were finding in sapwood. And so I'm isolating these different stains and rots. We're recording the amount of damage all the way up and down the tree. And we'll also be looking at the successional progression of these fungi through these trees, all to try to understand what sort of pest risk will we have after this, what sort of insects are contributing to the degradation of the wood as we would want, and also what fungi are causing damage for whatever uses we want to use for the wood, but again, what would be causing the nutrient cycling that is needed after a disturbance. So first we have, first to tackle the stain question: what is coffee stain, what is blue stain, versus what's in non-stained wood. I isolate fungi, and we have started doing DNA extraction, and I have some results from that, from these isolated fungi. And then to look at the successional changes of fungi throughout time, we're grinding wood and extracting DNA from that. And a student from U of A is doing this for her program, for her graduate program. So for some preliminary results, I'm finding that with increased fire severity, we get more, a larger number of fungi in that wood. So that is more pronounced for aspen. So any aspen that had even low severity damage on it, we had a greater number of fungi on there compared to, say, white spruce, where it wasn't really till the high severity damage on that tree. So some canopy had to be consumed for that one, that we get an increase in fungi, and lodgepole's kind of in the middle. And as it relates to what these fungi are doing, we're finding in aspen where we find a lot of fungi in Cytospora genus, which are actually endophytes that cause disease when the tree is stressed, which is an interesting phenomena in that it's also causing staining in aspen. In pine and spruce, we're getting some soft rot fungi, but also importantly beetle vectored fungi that are causing this stain. So more to come, as in we still need to sequence about half of the samples.
Thanks, Shannon. All right, so I will now just dive into our third objective, which you can see from the slide here, is about mammals. And we wanted to basically, in order to really, as much as we can within the skills we have, flesh out as much about these consequences as possible. And so my contribution here is to talk about the effects on habitat for species at risk, in particular vertebrates, mammals, and I'll be talking about bats, chiropterans. So I'll just do a little quick primer on bats to start. There are a number of species of bats in the boreal forest in Alberta, and you can see the maps that I'll show in the next couple slides. The purple color shows the range of occurrence. So these large migratory species are actually everywhere in Alberta. We have the hoary bat, the eastern red bat, and the silver-haired bat. So these are characters that will leave during the winter but return every summer. And importantly, they were recently listed by CIF-IFC under the Species at Risk Act as endangered. So this was in 2023. This is largely due to the effect of wind energy facilities, windmills, that are intersecting their migratory paths. But there are questions, as identified by CIF-IFC, with respect to the effects of summer habitat loss and degradation changes, the effect of pesticides, which have downstream effects on the density of their prey. And so we identified bats, and in particular these endangered bats, as an important mammal to take a look at with respect, again, to all of the ecological consequences of either fire mitigation or the wildfires themselves. The next set are to talk about we'll talk about now about the hibernating species. So we have the northern myotis and the little brown, which are, little browns are everywhere. The northern myotis are in the forest. These two were also listed as endangered over 10 years ago. And as folks on the call probably know, this is due to a fungus that affects their hibernacula called, I'm not going to get the fungus name right, but it causes a condition called white nose syndrome, which affects their success due to, metabolic problems in the winter when they're sleeping, when they're hibernating. That's largely an Eastern North American concern, but it is arriving here now in Western Canada. And so anything that can affect these little mammals is worth looking at. So again, we want to investigate the effects of habitat and the potential for habitat modifications or loss due to these management actions we're talking about. And then there's a couple other species that are going to be present in our study area. They're not listed, but we wanted to take a sort of a biodiversity lens on this. And so we are interested in all of the bats that we're encountering in Fox Creek. So this includes the big brown, the long-legged myotis, and the long-eared myotis. I'm sort of skipping over a lot of bat ecology just for time, but as folks probably know, these are species that are active at night. They're largely insectivores, so they're eating insect prey. And because they either migrate or hibernate, we're talking largely about summer active species here. There are some really interesting questions about the possibility of overwintering and late season activity, but that's a different project for us. Okay, so those are the bats that we're interested in Alberta's boreal forest. A couple comments on what we think the effects may be. So fire is something that a really bad severe fire that is stand replacing will remove a lot of bat habitat. In the daytime, they're using roosts in mixed wood forest. That typically means under the bark of hardwood like trembling aspen. So a large fire would be removing habitat. However, a less severe fire might actually increase the number of roots due to tree mortality that create bark openings. When you remove big swaths of forest, you end up with more edges, and it varies a little bit by species, but it's effective to think about edges as a travel corridor for a lot of these species. They maybe will be leaving their roosts from after the daytime and traveling to an area where they want to forage, like a wet area where there's a higher density of insects. And so those three possible effects are sort of relevant for salvage logging as well, and maybe even thinning, where you are creating edges or increasing the sort of maneuverability, the space in some of these interior stands. And I'll probably say it over and over, but that will really depend on the species that we're looking at. So for example, northern myotis, the septerinalis, they like those closed spaces, so that may not be good for them. But some of the larger species that want more space to maneuver, if you open up a stand, then suddenly you've actually created habitat. So there are interspecific differences, there's phenological differences, because later in the summer, you have a bunch of new pups that are now volant, they're able to fly. And so the habitat quality and the changes in habitat will vary depending on timing and species. So those are sort of the things we have in mind in terms of our objective, which is to estimate how these different and I'll call them disturbances. You can think of them, as we've said, as management or operational activities. But essentially, these are things that change the stem density or the age or the species composition of a stand. So we want to ask, how do those things affect bat activity in the boreal forest, and particularly in mixed wood like we find, as Jen said, in Fox Creek. So we expect there to be less activity in salvage log stands where there's been a fire that had a lot of most of the timber removed, but we expect because in the Fox Creek fire, we have this sort of intermediate severity fire, we expect there to be an increase in the number of roosts available because of the fact that it's not stand replacing, but you do have some tree mortality that'll increase the number of places that bats can roost, including under the bark and downstream after a few years if there are woodpecker holes, the number of woodpecker holes increasing and so on. So we have some predictions. We have our design, which is to ask about what happened in burn stands versus salvage log stands after the fire, and then we had some controls. We used ultrasonic detectors to look at the activity in those sites. We sampled for a couple different periods, again, to get at that phenological effect. We deployed along linear features. I normally study larger terrestrial mammals where linear features in Alberta's boreal forest are always playing an important role. So it was interesting to learn that it's important to sample along those features because they use them more, the detectability is higher and so on. So the linear features in Fox Creek were used for our sampling. And we did basically an interval of time before and after sunset and sunrise. It says 1 week here, that varied a little bit. It was sort of 4 days up to 10 days. So here's our map of the area again, as Jen showed. I'll just show one more with our site locations. And it's not totally clear from this, but they are all on seismic lines. And you can see that the oil and gas infrastructure in the area, we used it to access our sites. So that made it a little bit easier. Here's a couple photos of the burn stands that we went to, and you can see we're talking about pretty nice boreal mixedwood here. There's a solid dominance of trembling aspen with a lot of white spruce kind of growing in. So this is pretty primo bat habitat, and because it burned in 2023, it's really a nice spot for us to test our predictions. So we used Wildlife Acoustics ultrasonic recorders, both the Song Meter 4 and the Song Meter Mini, which both have ultrasonic capability. This is folks on the call are probably familiar with this, but essentially you put this on a tree, or in our case, on the top of a pole. You want to kind of get it up as high as you can in order to get those flying bats. And it just sort of turns on with a schedule and records all of the sonar, the echolocating ultrasonic calls the bats are making, which have species-specific characteristics, including frequency. So the larger bats, the eastern red, the hoary, and the silver bats are calling at lower frequencies. Some of those interior species like northern myotis call at higher frequencies. And the actual sonogram that is recorded has species-specific characteristics as well. So that's all just to say that we do intend to take the data that we collected using these and try to do our best to identify what species we're hearing. Here's a little cartoon of a forest with a seismic line labeled on it. So essentially what we did is put our ARU, our ultrasonic automated recording unit, in the middle of the seismic line. I should have put a little distance measure on here. That yellow pole is 4 meters long. So the ARU is quite high up in the air, which is good. And it's interesting when you talk with real serious bat researchers, they'll tell you the higher the better. You really need to get it up in the air, which of course we tried to do. But there's sort of a logistical constraint on that. You can't have it 10 meters in the air. Those poles would be too long. Here's a photo of one. I don't know how clear that is, but you can see me off on the right getting a guiding a support string in place. Essentially what we did is we put our long extendable 4-meter pole in the middle of the seismic line, taped electrical tape to a stake, and then supported using 4 guidelines. I hope that's more or less clear. If you look sort of 75% of the way up the photo, you can see the little ARU on the top of that pole. We wanted to measure a couple other site characteristics in order, there's two reasons for this, and it's a little tricky in terms of the sampling theory, but essentially, when you get a call, or maybe more importantly, when you don't get a call, the reason may be that the bat wasn't there, that's obvious, but it could also be that it was there and you didn't hear it. So we wanted to measure a couple things that affect both of those things, including, so basically the tree height and the shrub height, these are things that might affect how likely the bat is to call and to be navigating near our ARU. It's also helpful for us to get a good sense of the ecosite. But an important one is clutter. So when the airspace around, or sort of as you're flying along, if you imagine you're a bat, you're flying along the seismic line, the amount of clutter will affect whether or not you want to use that line and how much navigating you're having to do. So we did a simple Pythagorean measurement estimate using the horizontal and vertical distance to the closest clutter in four quadrats around the ARU. So these are a couple things that we measured at the ARUs. We had the height of the trees and the shrubs and the clutter. We also did a couple ecosite measurements, which we did off of the line. So we went 25 meters into a stand that was sort of representative of what the line would look like, in the sense that it was not disturbed by linear seismic line development. And we did a few measurements to assess what kind of, just to get a description of our ecosite. So we calculated the basal area, the tree height in there, as well as the canopy cover. For the trees, we also, of course, recorded species, their alive dead status, diameter of breast height, the degree of decay, the scorch heights for the in the burn stands. And yeah, this is a bunch of things that we calculated for our ecosite measurements. We also did an understory vegetation estimate, and this was for two reasons. One is to contribute again to those ecosite descriptions that will help us understand why the bats are active in the places they are, but also because we wanted to, it's a bit of a sneaky additional response variable. We want to know how these different disturbance histories have affected the understory vegetation. And so I'll just show some very brief results with respect to that. So we have total forb and graminoid cover, as well as short woody species and total species cover. And you can see that we already there are some differences, including some higher coverage of forbs and woody species in the burned treatment. So we're seeing kind of a neat successional signal there. This burn was only a year old when we did these measurements. We also looked at a couple of diversity metrics, including Shannon-Simpson's and species richness. And you can see again, there's kind of a neat signal with respect to the burn having a slightly higher diversity and richness. So that's it for the results I'm going to show. There's a lot coming, and we're planning to get out again this summer to add to these data, but we have a lot of work to do to get all of our bat data annotated and summarized, as well as to continue working on these site characteristics and vegetation responses. So here we are at 40 minutes after, and we're basically wrapping up. Just a couple comments about what we've learned so far, and I'm doing this. Right? So in year 1 and 2, we did a bunch of sampling. All 3 projects have got a lot of data in hand. In we're planning this next summer in year 3. There will be more data collection for the bat project, but I believe the other 2 objectives, the data collection is wrapped up. So there's more coming.
Yep,
okay, so yeah, more to do. We're hoping these data will be useful for identifying ways to get a handle on the financial component of fire mitigation. We're recording the risks and rate of change or damage of trees from pests and ways of maintaining wildlife habitat.
A word about identifying ways to pay for fire mitigation. During this presentation, we tried to focus on using BAG, because we were looking at really using 100% of the resources while not using the top or the that part that remained after you cut the tree.
The slash or the full?
Yeah, so while not using the top or the roots, that is making sure, although it is a salvage operation, we leave as much biomass on the side as possible to facilitate soil regeneration. There is a side of this work that is looking, this is another presentation for another day, but we are looking at what happened after fire for the soil, how is the soil responding to fire intensities and these type of things. With Jennifer, we are preparing a publication on that, but how to pay? Usually after fire, the best way, the easiest way to pay for it is through lumber. But as you know, the shelf life of recovering the logs and to produce good quality lumber is pretty short. As we saw after year one, you already have a significant amount of insect investing in the trees. So you may end up having lumber that are visually not appealing and even mechanically may pose some issues because of the amount of walls you have in it. Jen slightly talked about it, but even a low intensity fire will generate what we are calling coffee stand wood. And when you end up in some hardware and you find yourself with a lumber with these coffee stand, let's say it is not very appealing, and even if it may still be used for what you are planning, it may be difficult to sell. So the idea here is to make sure we harvest for year 1 and 2 for lumber, and we did it. But after the window for lumber manufacturing is gone, what can you do? You still need to manage that stand. You still need to take care of endangered species, as Eric explained. You need to pay for all this. And we all know that producing chemicals, small flags of chemicals, generate way more revenue than tons of lumber. That's why we are looking at, okay, we already recovered lumber. And recovering chemicals is not competing with recovering lumber, because basically it is different with the tissue. In one case, you use the wood. In the other case, you use the bark. And even after extracting, you still have, these are secondary metabolites, meaning they don't contribute to really the structure of wood. So after extracting, you still have, your extract, your chemical extract, but you also have your biomass that can be pelletized and used for fuel production, for example. So we are really trying in this project to use everything we can use to generate residue while being respectful of ecological environment by living on site, let's even say more than traditional industry used to do.
So yeah, I hope we've sort of made the case that there's a value to working in a multidisciplinary way. We have a last comment here about taking some of what we've learned and applying it to larger areas, including national parks and other federal lands, to try to understand all of these downstream effects and consequences of these management actions. And as you can probably detect, we're sort of interested in knowing these things in the context of wildfires as well. But we do really want to, as Cyriac was saying, there's a need to understand how all of the revenue, all of the consequences of specific management actions moving into this future where we're having to deal with wildfire as a management problem more frequently. I think we can wrap up. We just want to thank the Wildfire Resilient Futures Initiative, which is an internal CFS funding stream that have given us some funding for this. The Forest Service and the Wood Fibre Center, the OERD, the Office of Energy Research and Development Program, and a big thanks to our partners at Blue Ridge, West Fraser, Blue Ridge, who have been very supportive and keen to get this work going. And all of our internal colleagues who have been very helpful. Really, obviously this work requires a large team, and so they have made it possible. There's a few citations, and I think that's it. Maybe I'll just leave it on there.
Thank you, Eric, Jennifer, and Cyriac. That was a great presentation, very informative. Before moving on to the Q&A session, there is a post-webinar survey for our participants to fill out, and I'm going to launch it now.
Sharon, maybe I'll stop sharing. Does that seem right?
Yeah, that sounds good. So there are 2 questions in total, so you may need to scroll down to see the second question. All right, so there are 2 questions in the Q&A pod, and I guess the first question is for Eric to answer. Eric, in your opinion, what are the reasons for a lower percentage, around 10% salvage logging of burned area following the fire in British Columbia?
All right, so the question is why fires in British Columbia have a lower amount of salvage logging?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in your opinion, what are the reasons for a lower percentage, around 10% salvage logging of burned area following the fire in British Columbia?
I mean, it's a great question, but I'm probably going to pass on trying to answer it. This is a sort of a forestry management question that is going to have a lot of moving parts and specific details for certain management areas, certain kinds of fires, certain kinds of forests. I study things that move around on 4 legs, so that's out of my wheelhouse. I don't know if you guys know.
I will attempt answering that, and maybe Jen will complement the part I'll be missing. And obviously, as Eric said, this is a very complex question that touches many area, and I'm not at all pretending will comprehensively answer the question. One of the issues is policy. The policies that surround the authorization for forest company to actually get into the forest after fire is, let's say, at the best work in progress. So forest management being a provincial matter, provinces need to have policy that allow forest industry to first to get in the forest very quick. The window to act is very short, and we use in our institutions to take time to do things. So if you take months before issuing authorization for work to be done, the window is done. The industry is in the time of the year where forest operations is probably not very easy to do. And you also have to consider that people usually consider that fire decrease the value of the wood. So we talk about shelf life for lumber, for example. Most of our industries manufacture lumber. So after a year or sometimes 2 years, the wood is visually not appealing. So will the industry still make money by investing to get in there and salvage? It is a big question mark. And some industry just decide it doesn't worth it. And that's really the appeal of the work we are trying to do. Because what we are trying to achieve here is to say, first thing first, you harvest for lumber. As we are speaking today, is the easiest way to generate revenue by salvaging. But don't get discouraged because the policies are not there and you get in the field 6 months later or a year later, because you can still produce other goods through the prescriptions of the bioeconomy, because we just look at forest operation, at forest industry through lumber and pulp and paper. Pulp and paper don't even speak about it, especially if you are trying to manufacture good quality paper, because the random dots just make it unappealing and you will need to spend a lot of money to bleach that. So you have the biofuel that is still there, the biomaterials that are still there, the biochemicals that are still there. Today we focus in saying what we are doing in the frame of biochemicals, but with Jennifer, we have another project on the same field where we are manufacturing biomaterials. So we need somehow, and that's what we are trying to do here, we need to inform our industries that you can increase that less than 10% to 50, 60, 70, if you consider the full potential of the biomass, which is not only lumber. We have that issue because the only thing we are looking for is lumber, and the window to make money with lumber is quite short. And that is not only BC, that is crude or concrete. It is true in BC, it is true in Quebec, it is true everywhere in Canada.
Thank you. So the next question for you guys is there any similar research occurring in large staining treatments or staining plus RX fire treatments, including fire smart staining treatments near communities in Alberta or other boreal locations, study locations that have not been, yet been recently burned by wildfire?
I don't think there have been that from our knowledge, we haven't run into a similar sort of research looking at post-prescription in this multidisciplinary sort of aspect. But we do have a program or collaborators in Quebec doing a similar project as us in Alberta.
In the acknowledgement page that Eric presented, he didn't cite Eric didn't cite names because we have so many people we have so many names in there, and it was just not meaningful to. No, it was meaningful, but in order to save time, Eric didn't cite names. But one of the names there was Christian Weber. Christian is our colleague based in Quebec. And while we presented you what we are doing in the field in Alberta, Christian, through one project that we have together, is doing the same in Quebec. So this is kind of this we are presenting here is the Alberta side of a larger project that is also carried out in Quebec. But out of what we are doing here and Christian is doing with us, we are not aware of people doing a similar work here in Canada. But that said, you will find people working on tinnings, but not really in the frame of mitigating fire and finding conventional ways post-fire.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions in the Q&A pod. And before we wrap up, I just want to quickly remind everyone that this session is being recorded and the recording will soon be available on the CIF Open Access e-lecture page. And if anyone has any follow-up questions for our presenters after this webinar, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll help you connect with them. All right, I would like to bring this session to a close if there are no further questions. Thank you all for participating in our CIF electronic lectures. And once again, thank you very much to Eric, Jennifer, and Cyriac for the great presentation. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.